But yeah, I think that we just simply need to investigate with a better set of investigating eyes and see. Now, you're going to hear from, not only from my tone, but also from my argument here, that I think what's being presented to us, because it's being presented in such an underhanded way, ought to cause us to have some level of concern as to really what's behind it. And so where the matter may get us into trouble to speak to it in a public sense of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea for Idahoans, I can tell you this: if you've not read the proposition, you need to go and read it. And I would highly encourage you read it before November the 6th so that you're familiar with the language and that you know what you're voting for or against. So if you're in favor of it, you need to be sure to vote yes. If you're against it, you need to be sure to vote no. But at the base level of this, you need to be a well-informed voter. And this is an argument I've long-standingly made for us. We just simply, we have a responsibility in a government that allows its people to speak into what we want and what we desire to have in our culture. Then it is important then that we be well-informed. And I would make this argument, it would be the same if we were living in a government that did not want our input on the matters. We still need to be a well-informed, responsible followers of Christ. At the end of the day, some level we have to say, if this is approved, then what does this mean for me, the Christian? Does it mean I need to pack my bags and move to Canada? No, I don't think so. I don't think that will satisfy or fix anything. What does that mean? Should I speak out publicly against it, or should I speak publicly for it? I would say after you've done your investigative work and you've become a well-informed and responsible follower of Christ, then you should engage yourself in such a manner that would display God's glory. So we think about it in this respect. It's being presented to us in this respect that, and this speaks to our Idaho independence, doesn't it? That this is a deregulation. Now, anytime the word deregulation of government hand is kind of enticing to a Westerner or an Idahoan, is to think, yes, I want to deregulate the government's influence upon all things. So it's being presented as a deregulating of an industry and a celebrating. Notice the language that is being heralded to you both in the commercial and in the print promotion of this. It is the deregulation of an industry and a celebration of Western history. That sounds very appealing. It's, by the way, being promoted by your current governor. He's all bits in favor of this. And it's also, so how often do you find the governor of the state of Idaho and the mayor of the largest city in Boise in agreement about the same product, about the same initiatives? It's pretty rare that you would find an openly Democrat and an open Republican to come into an agreement upon a social matter. I would say this should at least cause you to say, I wonder what's brought them together. What is it that has brought them together that they could be in agreement of? And this is not a promotion of one political party over another. It may sound like that to the uninformed ear, that here is a promotion from a pastor in a local community promoting something, but here is something that is being presented to us by the leader of our state as something good for the economy, good for schools, and good overall just for society. And so we just need to walk into this relatively carefully. So anything that's being referred to us as a deregulation of an industry and a celebration of Western history, then we need to do better than just answer according to the political itch that we like to hear, the rhetoric that appeals to us. First of all, I think we need to define gambling. I think this is something that has largely been missing from the pulpit in the church in recent years. Just stop and think for a minute. When's the last time you heard a pastor in an evangelical church even mention gambling in a negative tone? Usually it's in a somewhat of a laughing, jesting, a lighthearted demeanor. But when is the last time you heard a caution concerning gambling? Now, preacher, are you telling me that I shouldn't be betting with girls who are bigger than me that I can outrun them for a nickel? We're not talking about that. So we have to have a definition of gambling in order to then make a better, well-informed decision on such a matter as this. Now, do I have opinions about these things? And yes, I do. Are they strong opinions? Yes, indeed they are. But at the core of it, I need to be careful that I don't lump everything that I want to lump into the term gambling into the term gambling. So what does the dictionary tell us about the word gambling? It's not necessarily altogether helpful, but it certainly begins to put a framework around this. Gambling is defined as any industry. Let's see, where I'm totally lost in my notes here. So hopefully I'll come to that definition here in just a minute. It is that which includes playing for money or recreating for money. So this is different. What we're talking about here is not that of playing. So see, here I'm struggling even with simple terms to put bingo in the class of simple gambling, and that's somehow innocent. And perhaps it is, and perhaps it isn't. It probably needs and requires a pretty serious investigation on each individual. I don't think a church needs to lay out a policy on the matter. I think the individual believer, under the conscience that God has given to you by the work of the Holy Spirit, could come away and make a good, conclusive decision on this. So you can see how into the weedy parts of everything we could get. A raffle ticket here, a bingo game there, a nickel bet against a bigger girl there. All of this. Is everything like that in the same terminology of gambling? And I think the little work that the English word gives to us by definition is at least a starting place again. It helps us put forth a foundation or a bedrock to think better. And that is the difference of, the gambling is that of playing for money or in the recreating for money. So what we have to do then is at least come back here and think. Whenever you're talking about, or someone is talking about gambling, are they, so let me back up and give one more preface to this that I want to be extremely careful in, because the next thing you know, then we just begin to defend the recreational side of it and ignore the desperate side of it, that an individual then begins to use earned wages and to put them aside into excessiveness that then begins to decay not only their own personal ability to support the work of God, but then their disability to support their own families, or then to become a menace to society because they have whittled away all of their supposed slush funds by the playing of games that are highly addictive. And so we just simply have to begin thinking through this. Many will say, well, come on, Paul. I mean, come on, preacher. We take risk all the time. We gamble with our lives every day. We get behind the wheel of a car. How many times have you heard someone say that's perhaps one of the biggest gambles, one of the biggest risks you take every time you get behind a vehicle? And it is, isn't it? It's a risk. You get behind the vehicle and you know that my mother is also behind the vehicle. You are taking a serious risk. I'm saying that with her present. Can you imagine what I would say if she wasn't here? I don't know. Can you imagine? Yes, it's indeed a risk, but is it the same risk? Some will even come so far as say it's a greater risk to walk across the street than to go to Jackpot, Nevada and play a couple of dollars on the nickel machines. Yeah, it probably is a risk, but is it the same kind of risk? I think we need to become well-informed and responsible thinkers in what we're saying. And what are we trying to defend and what are we trying to promote? Here, by definition, again, we'll go back to Webster's and think that this is a small or unequal expense for a high-end reward. The hope that we might get in on the big payoff for a couple of dollars. So, one can at least make argument here. Is there anything inherently wrong in hoping that you're going to win big by spending a couple of dollars? Well, certainly I can assure you this, the gambling industry hopes you think like that. They're banking on the fact that that's how you're going to think. A couple of dollars here, a couple of dollars there, hoping that someday I'll cash in big. This is how most every state in the United States got passed through a state-funded lottery. And the idea that a couple of dollars here won't break the bank everywhere. But in the reality of it, the statistical reality here is that those who more readily play the lottery are playing with excessive amounts of money. Because they're banking on the fact that $1 here, $2 there, someday I'm going to break in and be in the cash. The idea here in an economy, so we just consider a few moments. Now I'm going to be really careful not to go searching out all the proof texting that I can make argument for or against a matter. I just simply want to bring to question here the economy of what God has designed. So we go to the Bible and we look, how does God expect for man to earn a wage? Now I've kind of answered the statement or the question inside of the question. The word earn is the anticipated economy that God has designed for you and I to make a living wage by earning, by working. We see this as a principle both of Old Testament and New Testament. And Paul to the church at Ephesus says, stop stealing and get a job. Well, that's my paraphrased version of it. He's saying, go get a job. And out of the money that you make, use your money for the glory of God. So, to the believer, he has to at least stop and ask some questions here in this. Am I expecting to provide for my family out of a recreational or by playing for money? Is that the way God expects me to provide for my family? And I think we can safely make an argument that that's anti-biblical. It's anti-establishment of the economy of God. Now, I'm open to good argument and good discussion, fair and friendly inside of that to see if there is another way that God would expect for us to provide for our families. Does God expect us to provide for our families from our recreational cashing in of the possibility, or is it that God has designed a standard way, a systematic way, a steady way, regardless of the amount of it? That's not the question here. But steady, consistent, out of the labor and out of the working of our hands. This is the economy that God has established, not just for Christians. This is the successful economy that God has designed for civilization at large. What civilization is able to sustain an industry based off of playing and recreating for money? Oh, I know. We quickly think to the neighbors to the south. Apparently, they've found a way to make it the economy, a successful economy based off of the playing and the recreating for money, the appeal to people from all over the world to come and do this. Well, time really won't allow me to unfold every statistical finding of what the economy is like to live in the state of Nevada. And I say this with a great joy for many Christians who live in the state of Nevada, but they also would acknowledge that the economy of Nevada, even though it's promoted as healthy and strong and vibrant and flourishing, it is an economy that is crippled with criminal expenses, courts tangled up, police forces entrenched in diabolical kind of activity inside of that kind of economy. So one might be able to prove by one statistic of the success of it, but at the expense of all of the things then that society needs to have in order for it to flourish. Society cannot flourish when crime is at the top of the economy. Well, certainly you're hearing some of my own personal opinions inside of this, so let me press on, lest I be accused of preaching opinion. Certainly it is present to this evening in this particular matter, but I'm trusting that you know you don't have to go to the voting booth and vote the same way that your pastor would vote, or to even feel obligated to vote in the way in which he would, which he's not, demanding that everyone in this church vote in the same way. I'm just presenting for you a consideration inside of the reality of this proposition. So God has established a standard economy of work for wages, not a hopeless hope that playing or recreating with my money is the way to have my wages. At a level, this is the opposite, or at that level, I would more strongly say, at that level, that argument is opposite of the established order of God. And I think we can see that clearly, and I think argument is strongly made from the precepts and the principles of Scripture. So you've already given some input into this. What is Proposition 1? Is it about horse racing? Probably not. Yes. Is it about gambling? Probably more about gambling than horse racing. Do you realize that because it's already legal in Idaho, you go and read the proposition, which I highly recommend it. Do not just take my word for this. Go and read the proposition. No language of actual horse racing is actually even used. It's all about the fast bet on historic horse racing. This is funny language, because the slot machine, which is the street name for the fast bet machine, slot machines, and apparently, even according to the proposition, this is a betting on historic horses, historic horse races. So not necessarily the horse race that you've gone to watch, but on past horse races. And this just seems so foreign to me. It's like, if you know who the winner is, why not bet on that one? But it's even worse than that. It's just a slot machine that you're allowed to push every 5 seconds. And that there is this pool of horses that are in the slot machine. And if the one that, if you're not necessarily betting on, your pastor's giving you betting information on how to better bet. No, he's not. I speak from that which I do not know. There is this machine that you're hitting every 5 seconds, and if you get so many horses that won historic horse races in a row, then that's how you win. It's a slot machine. They've just replaced historic horse races with jokers or kings or aces, or cherries or strawberries, or Cabbage Patch Kids, or whatever other kind of nonsense you want to put into the slot machine. You're sitting there, and yes, you do have to go to a place that is legally able to have either live horse racing or legally able to put horse racing on a screen that's happening somewhere else. These are the only places that these are allowed in, these machines, and they're slot machines. Has nothing to do with betting on the actual horse race that you've gone to see. Do you see how diabolical the presentation of this proposition is? Every commercial that you will see that is promoting of this is putting the grandeur of a horse and the beauty of a horse and a jockey racing to the finish line as the promotion of it. When it's really all about a guy sitting at a slot machine pushing a button every 5 seconds, which the state of Idaho has identified as highly addictive activity. This is addictive. Apparently it really is. You know, my deceased buddy who pastored at the Jackpot Baptist Church for years told me that the greatest problem that they face at his church when he pastored in Jackpot, Nevada, and I would argue that Zach would testify the same to this, is not drugs, it's not alcohol, it's not families falling apart. It is the addiction, those who are highly addicted to highly addictive gaming. They get there saying, I'm only going to spend $10 today. They go and say, I'm only going to spend $50 today. And $1,000 later, they're calling the pastor saying, I don't know how to go home and tell my wife that I have no money. We have no money to feed the family this month. I don't know how I'm going to do that. Obviously, apparently not everybody is in that low level of the pit, because many people keep going back and somehow they're able to survive. But understand this with a greater understanding, that Proposition 1 is solely about slot machine gambling and has nothing to do with horse racing. You need to be a well-informed, responsible follower of Christ. So when you go to the voting booth on November the 6th, you're voting with full knowledge of what you're voting for. In 2015, the state of Idaho declared slot machine gambling a highly addictive and illegal activity in Idaho. You know what that means? It means there was a day when slot machine gambling was legal in Idaho, and not a time in the great distance. But in recent days, in this generation, our legislation identified that slot machine gambling was a drain on our economy. And it was destructive to the civilization that is built off of family values. And so today, promoted by the governor of Idaho and the mayor of Boise, Proposition 1 is presented to you as that which is bringing back millions of dollars to the Idaho tax base. That Idaho schools are going to benefit greatly by the tax revenue that comes out of this activity. And that public facilities are going to get a remodeled facelift. Does it sound familiar to you at all? Remember when they convinced Idahoans that a state lottery would be a great idea? The historic data is not in favor of this. Has revenue money out of the state-funded lottery gone toward public education? Let's be honest. It has. Has it been to the level that they promised us it would be? No, not even close. Have schools been built in our region off of funds that came through the Idaho lottery? Yes. But why do they keep coming back to the taxpayer and saying we need to pass a bond to pay for this building? Because the kinds of money that we were promised would come out of the revenue that would come from this kind of activity has really not gone to and done everything that it was promoted it would do. Do you realize the sponsors of this proposition have presented that 100% of the revenue that they make off of actual horse racing will go to public education and scholarship funds? Do you understand how careful we have to be good listeners of what's being presented to us? That sounds like, on the surface, of an extraordinarily generous thing. That they're promising 100% of the revenue that comes from their earnings in horse racing will go to support Idaho schools and scholarships and public facilities, when the proposition has nothing to do with horse racing. Has nothing to do with the kind of wages that they're going to make on any horse race that they're involved in. And this promise is even more narrow into this, that it's only Idaho-based sponsors, which means this bill has sponsorship from outside of the state of Idaho. Well, again, we need to be well informed and responsible in this matter. So I think we can come to a conclusion. This is not about horse racing at all. This is about highly addictive, rapid bet slot machines. And this activity is proven in every civilization where it is current. It is proven to be a decline of self-discipline among its citizens, and the impact is negative upon the family. It leaves a long-lasting negative influence upon the economy, and it even has an impact upon the church in the spiritual realm of a community. Just think about this. The older in the room would know of a day when churches spoke boldly about the demise of a civilization that has highly addictive slot machine gambling in it or lottery in it. But we're probably in about a 30-year desert of pastors, a high concentration of pastors who'd be willing to stick their neck out on the line and speak about the dangers of highly addictive gambling. I would argue that I would find some in the city, but I'm certain I am not in the majority of the evangelical pastors who would even want to address this. Probably because there's such a light-hearted mentality given to gambling in our culture today. And that's a tragedy. The church has lost her voice in this particular matter. It's not that we need to get out on the streets and preach the demise of gambling. We need to be consistent on the streets preaching the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. We need to be preaching and be certain that we're warning the citizens of the sins and the consequences of sin against God. And that's our primary work. Do we have a voice here? Should we speak into this in our culture? I think at one level we can say we should logically answer this in one of two ways. Yes, we should, and we should be careful and compassionate and certain in our discussion of it. Or if we say no, then I think we have to be willing to be part of the demise of the economy, that the church, whom God has established to be the pillar and the buttress of truth. When the church is silent on matters of truth, then the church is responsible at least a level for the fall and the collapse of an economy and everything that is related to that. So, now I know you're asking, Paul, why don't you tell us how you really feel about this? This is not about saving Idaho horse racing. All you need to do is go find a calendar somewhere and find out when the next horse race is. No one has stopped it. No one has declared it illegal. You need to go and read Idaho Code on this matter. This stuff's all available to you. I brought a copy of it, but I think I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and put the responsibility upon you. Go read the Idaho Code about gambling. It's our constitutional declaration. This activity that is being promoted right now as a productive benefit to our economy is actually against our Idaho Constitution. Just by the language of the Idaho Constitution, which is a secular document. And so, a logical thinking, processing individual, a well-responsible citizen, not to mention a follower of Christ, would see that the activity that is being promoted to us right now is actually that of a risky behavior and troubling at best. Okay, let me skip through these other matters that were related to what I was going to read here on the code, Idaho Code about. But let's think about this. Let's be intellectually honest on the matter. A reason why many Christians who are opposed to gambling are so opposed to it, let's be intellectually honest with ourselves. We put hedge rules around ourselves so that we will stay as far away from the addictive activity as possible. Let's be intellectually honest with ourselves about this. We could include here a long conversation about whether a well-informed and responsible follower of Christ ought to drink alcohol or not. But let's be intellectually honest. We put hedges there to say, this is what I do. I'm not going to even socially drink or occasionally drink an alcoholic fermented drink that has the propensity and the tendency to change my state of thinking. I'm going to do everything to stay away from even the possibility of being altered by that. So I'm telling you, this is how I treat it. So let's be intellectually honest on the matter. It's right for us to put up certain kinds of hedges here to keep us from falling into the larger sins that are behind here. Now let's also be intellectually careful and honest here and realize that we don't have reason here to be legalistic on the matter. Because now we're being a promoter of the hedge rule over the law that God has given us. We've made our protective laws more important to us than the law that God's given to us. So let's be intellectually honest there. Let's not be afraid to say, here's why I don't do that. It's because I see the end result of activity beyond where I'm willing to go and the danger that it is not only to myself, to my family, to my society, to the economy. I'm just going to stay as far away from it as possible. You're not going to go to hell because you bought a lottery ticket. But do you realize the highly addictive activity is defined as highly addictive because that's what it is? So put up barriers to keep yourself from losing the joy of the Lord that we read about in Psalm chapter 16. There is a path that leads to joy, and it is in the presence of His fullness of joy in Christ, and in His right hand there are pleasures forever greater than the biggest winning you could imagine getting off of a nickel or off of a dollar or off of a horse race. Let's be intellectually honest on the matter and go there as a responsible and a well-informed follower of Christ. So that's my encouragement to you tonight. It's not to go and vote like I do. I'm not a Republican, by the way. So I'm not here to promote the Republican Party. I'm not a Democrat either, for those who are thinking, well, if you're not a Republican, you must be a Democrat. No, I'm neither of those. And I do belong to a political party which I now feel like I get close to being out of bounds to being the promoter of a political activity. Not out of bounds for us as a church, but out of bounds of my duty as a proclaimer of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ as my primary work. But I would say to you, go to the voting booth on November the 6th as a well-informed, responsible follower of Christ. And vote with a clear conscience. However you vote, vote in that respect with a full knowledge of what's being presented to you. And vote according to how honest you think those who are promoting this are being. And then vote according to the values that closest support your positions. And you should feel a joy in the Lord that you live in a country that you can do that. And you're not going to be disbanded from the church because you voted one way or another. You're going to be encouraged by this church to be a well-informed and a responsible follower of Christ.